By one-sided coverage.
Applause for a narrow victory. Turkey votes yes to change its constitution.
Sometimes when assessing the coverage of a major news story, it helps to do the math. The constitutional referendum in Turkey last weekend, which ended in a narrow yes vote and a victory for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is one such story. According to figures released by a Turkish opposition party, the rallies, speeches, and political events of the No campaign attracted a total of 45 hours of live news coverage on the Turkish airwaves over a campaign lasting 8 weeks. The yes side, led by President Erdogan, had more than 10 times as much, 485 hours of live news coverage. That imbalance was one of the issues that led the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, to declare that the referendum had been contested on an unlevel playing field. The Turkish media landscape has been in transformation ever since Erdogan first took power as prime minister in 2003, with most critical voices, particularly on the television side, falling in line with the government. Since last year's failed coup, more than 170 media outlets have been shut down, and dozens of reporters are behind bars, cementing Turkey's reputation as the world's leading jailer of journalists. As for international media outlets portraying the president as increasingly authoritarian, Erdogan is having none of it. He dismisses criticism from Europe as politically motivated, the work of Turkey's enemies, and says that the people have spoken. Our starting point this week is the Turkish capital, Ankara. A referendum, according to its dictionary definition, is a general vote by the electorate on a single political question. But is it really possible, in Turkey's case, to hold a vote on a single question, constitutional reform, when the question asked, the bulk of the information presented, and most of the explanations provided all come from a leader as dominant, as visible, as ubiquitous as President Erdogan?
If you look at the results of Turkish elections, it's all pretty consistent. People in this country have political views, they consume their own media that corresponds to their political views, and they vote according to those views. They're voting less on the merits of the Constitution, less on the arguments that they see in the media, and more on what they see as Erdogan having done or not done for them.
But it's important to stress that people voting yes didn't know anything about the context. When we asked why they voted yes, the answer was Erdogan related. If Erdogan wants it, we'll vote yes. In other words, there's been a personality cult created around him, which directly influences the way people vote.
The most significant change in the Constitution is that it gives enormous power to the president. That's an undeniable fact. And in a country where the media is so weak under a one-man regime, and it's definitely a one-man regime, freedom of press will be eradicated.
The referendum question that passed, barely, fundamentally reshapes the government, turning a parliamentary democracy into a presidential republic. It arms Erdogan with the power to limit Parliament's ability to amend new laws, to dissolve the assembly if he wishes, and to unilaterally impose states of emergency. In covering the campaign, Turkish broadcasters seemed slightly ahead of the curve, acting as though the president was already all-powerful. They gave his yes side 10 times more live coverage than the no side received, and shied away from the kinds of questions his critics wanted asked.
Sayın Cumhurbaşkanımız Recep Tayyip Erdoğan'la söyleşiye başlıyoruz.
We've seen plenty of deferential presenters who can hardly keep their composure in Erdogan's presence. They almost fall off their chairs. They behave apologetically in front of him.
Hangi maddeden başlamak istersiniz?
And are ready to confirm whatever he says.
One can't help but ask, is there any media now that aren't pro-government? For almost 10 years, it's been very clear that the AK Party leadership has tried to create its own media sector and has pretty much achieved it. So the referendum took place at a time when we had no alternative critical media voices.
Gerçekleşti.
Which does not seem to be an issue with some Turkish journalists. Mustafa Karoglu is an Ankara-based columnist with the Daily Star, a paper that has been in Erdogan's corner since 2004, when it was seized by an asset management company controlled by the government.
Özel radyo televizyon kanallarının
Private radio and TV channels aren't obliged to be balanced or give equal space to everyone. Private media might have a group they support, and they should be allowed to broadcast that. Of course, if it were more balanced, that would make everyone happy. But even if both sides were as visible or were represented equally, that wouldn't have changed the referendum result.
Yine sonuç böyle çıkacaktı.
Karoglu's latter point, that balanced coverage of the campaign would have made no difference, is highly debatable. His prior assertion that private media should not be required to be balanced is flat out wrong. Turkey's broadcasting regulations demand that private outlets provide even-handed news coverage. But having regulations is one thing, enforcing them is another. And the majority of officials at the regulatory agency responsible for that, RUTUK, have either been appointed by or support the AK Party government. The referendum took place in a country still under a state of emergency, established after last year's failed coup. The government blamed Gulenists, members of an Islamic social and educational movement, for trying to seize power, lumped them in with Kurdish separatists, and forced the closure of multiple channels and newspapers affiliated with each. But among the 170-plus media outlets shut down and all the journalists arrested have been TV channels and reporters who have nothing to do with either the Gulen movement or the Kurdish issue.
Many of the independent news outlets on the left have closed down or gone underground, meaning they go online. And even the more independent big media, CNN Turk, Hürriyet, these folks, it's obvious they're practicing some kind of self-censorship. They're not saying what they think, and I think there's a certain climate of fear in the media, in the mainstream media landscape.
Many of the country's journalists, including its best ones, have been arrested. Ahmet Şık is in jail. Can Dündar had to leave the country. In the past, it was still possible to have a leadership that tolerated media groups it didn't like. Not anymore. Now, the leadership refuses to answer questions it disagrees with, won't accredit journalists it doesn't like, or just arrests them.
Kapatılan medya kuruluşlarının
Almost all of the media that were closed down supported terrorist groups or were producing propaganda for them. So when we say media outlets have been closed down or journalists have been imprisoned, let's not forget these categories. It's true that we know of some who were not propagandists.
olmadığı yönünde kanaatimiz olan kişiler var.
Even President Erdogan's backers acknowledge that some of the journalists behind bars should not be there. So where does his support come from? The Erdogan era has produced unprecedented economic growth in Turkey. The president has calculated correctly that pocketbook issues and political allegiances mean more to voters than mere freedom of expression. It would appear that he too has done the math. And all that extra news coverage, all that free FaceTime, doesn't hurt either. The lack of plurality on the Turkish airwaves has led to a proliferation of alternative news platforms online. Here are some of them. Uzguruz was launched 3 months ago by Can Dündar, the former editor of Cumhuriyet, now living in exile in Germany. It only lasted 2 days online in Turkey before being blocked by the Communications Authority. Gazete Duvar came online a month after last year's coup attempt. It reports on current affairs, and many journalists there say they lost their jobs in mainstream media outlets for reporting critically on the AK Party government. Hayır TV was set up during the referendum in support of the No camp. It posts interviews, infographics, and some live broadcasts. Its Turkish slogan, Tek Adama Karşı Çok Ses, means many voices against one man. Mediascope TV is the brainchild of ex-Haberturk daily columnist Rushan Çakır. It offers interviews with opposition voices no longer heard in the mainstream and provides daily news coverage via the social media app Periscope. And lest anyone think that there aren't enough pro-government voices on television, there are some more online. TVNet is a digital platform that also broadcasts over the airwaves. It has ties to members of President Erdogan's family and focuses on news and commentaries. Asen TV is a conservative news source known for its vox pop reporting style.